Hello, and welcome. Thank you for choosing to spend this time here, in this quiet space we've created together. Before we begin our journey through daily life in ancient Galilee, I want to invite you to get comfortable. Adjust your pillow, settle into your blankets, let your body find its natural resting position. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. The day is done, and this time is yours. If you find this helpful, if these long-form narratives bring you peace, consider subscribing. We create these extended journeys regularly, each one designed with the same care, the same attention to the rhythms that help you drift away. But that's something for another time. Right now, just be here. Take a slow breath in, and let it go. We're going to spend the next few hours exploring 100 facts about daily life in ancient Galilee. Not rushing, not hurrying. We'll move slowly through dawn in the Galilean countryside, the rhythms of fieldwork, coastal life at the Sea of Galilee, village home life and family, traditional crafts and artistry, the natural world and seasons, food preparation and communal gatherings, religious observance and spiritual practices, village community and social harmony, and finally, evening reflections and nighttime peace. The pace will be gentle, the tone will be soft, and you don't need to remember any of it. You don't need to stay awake for all of it. This is simply here, a companion for your journey into sleep. Let your eyes close if they want to. Let your breathing deepen. Let your mind begin to wander. As the first rays of sunlight painted the eastern hills gold, families across Galilee stirred gently to the cooing of rock doves, nesting in clay pots perched on rooftops. These ceramic vessels had been carefully chosen and positioned high above the courtyards, creating safe haven for the gentle birds that shared their morning songs with the waking households. The doves had selected these elevated homes for their protection from predators and their proximity to the daily activities below, where grain might be sifted and water might be spilled, creating opportunities for nourishment. Their soft cooing carried the calm assurance that night had passed safely and the familiar routines of daylight were beginning once more. The women who had placed those pots long ago understood this partnership, the quiet exchange of shelter for song, and they smiled softly as they rose from their sleeping mats. Their movements, unhurried in the dim light, filtering through narrow windows. The morning air carried the mingled scents of wild thyme and dew-kissed barley, while women quietly prepared small clay oil lamps whose flames cast dancing shadows on stone walls. These lamps, simple bowls with spouts for the wick, had been formed from river clay and fired in community kilns, their surfaces bearing the subtle marks of the potter's fingers. The olive oil filling them had been pressed the previous autumn, when the entire village had gathered for the harvest, working together to extract the precious liquid that would provide light through dark winter months. As first light crept across the stone floors, these small flames served both practical purpose and deeper comfort, the warm glow creating intimate spaces where families gathered before the busy day ahead. The thyme's pungent sweetness drifted in from nearby hillsides where it grew wild among the rocks, its hardy nature allowing it to thrive in the thin soil where cultivated plants would struggle. The barley fields, terraced into the slopes around the village, held overnight moisture that would soon evaporate in the growing warmth, releasing the earthy fragrance of grain ready for harvest. In the courtyards, roosters began their territorial calls at different pitches, creating a natural morning symphony that echoed across terraced hillsides planted with olive saplings. Each household kept its own small flock of chickens, the birds ranging freely during daylight hours but housed safely in stone coops at night. The roosters, chosen for their vigor and health, performed their dawn duties without fail, their varied voices creating layered sound that carried far beyond the village limits. Their calls served purposes beyond simple announcement of morning, establishing territory, communicating with distant rivals, and maintaining the social order within their mixed flocks. The olive saplings growing on the hillsides represented years of careful cultivation, young trees that would eventually produce the fruit that sustained the community through oil for light, food, and trade. These terraces had been carved into the stone-laden earth by countless generations, each building upon the work of those who came before, creating geometric patterns that followed the natural contours of the land. The gentle sound of hand mills grinding grain could be heard from multiple homes as families transformed last year's wheat harvest into fresh flour for the day's bread. These mills consisted of two stones, a lower stationary base, and an upper stone with a wooden handle, requiring steady circular motion that could be maintained for hours. Usually this work fell to the women of the household, who had developed strong arms and steady rhythm through daily practice. The sound was distinctive, a soft grinding that spoke of sustenance and continuity, each rotation producing more of the fine powder that would be mixed with water, yeast, and perhaps a pinch of salt. The wheat itself had been carefully stored in sealed clay jars to protect it from moisture and pests, each family's supply representing the success of the previous growing season and their hopes for the weeks ahead. Some would make flatbread to be baked on hot stones. Others might prepare dough for community ovens where several families would bake together later in the day. Goats bleated softly as they were led from simple stone enclosures, their hooves clicking against worn paths that generations had walked to reach hillside pastures. These paths, packed hard by countless feet and hooves over centuries, wound upward through the rocky landscape, following routes that made the most efficient use of the terrain. The goats themselves were valuable members of the village economy, providing milk, cheese, meat, and hides that could be transformed into clothing and containers. Their keepers knew each animal by sight and temperament, understanding which would wander and which would stay close, which mothers were most protective of their kids and which were more relaxed. This intimate knowledge had been passed down through families, the art of reading animal behavior and providing appropriate care. The stone enclosures where they'd spent the night were practical structures, built from rocks cleared from fields and held together with clay. Designed more to keep predators out than to contain animals who generally remained loyal to the places where they were fed and sheltered. Men gathered at the village well, their quiet conversations mixing with the creak of the wooden pulley as they drew cool water from depths where the earth's steady temperature remained constant. These wells were central to village life, sometimes the only source of fresh water for miles around, and their maintenance was a shared responsibility. The buckets were made waterproof with pitch, lowered on rope woven from fiber plants, and raised with the steady effort of strong arms. While waiting their turn, men discussed weather patterns, the condition of crops, any news brought by travelers passing through. The water itself came from ancient aquifers, filtered through layers of rock over years or decades, emerging pure and cold even during the hottest summer months. This was also a place of social connection, where friendships were maintained and alliances forged, where the older men shared their accumulated wisdom with younger ones who were just learning to manage their own fields and flocks and families. The Sea of Galilee lay mirror calm, its freshwater surface reflecting the pink and orange dawn clouds, while cormorants stretched their wings on partially submerged rocks. This inland lake, also called Lake Tiberias or the Sea of Kinneret, depending on who was speaking its name, served as the primary water source for irrigation, fishing, and transportation. In these early hours, before the winds of day created ripples across its surface, the water became a perfect mirror, doubling the beauty of the sky above and creating an illusion of infinite space. The cormorants, dark birds with long necks and hooked beaks, used these rocks as drying stations after diving for fish, their spread wings absorbing the sun's warmth. They were patient hunters, capable of remaining underwater for extended periods, and their presence indicated healthy fish populations below. Fishermen had already launched their boats before first light, their voices carrying across the still water as they called to each other, positioning themselves to catch the fish that came close to the surface in the cooler temperatures of early morning. Children helped spread grain on flat rooftops to dry in the anticipated sun, using woven reed baskets to gently toss and separate the kernels from any remaining chaff. These rooftops had been carefully plastered with clay mixed with straw, creating surfaces that could be swept clean and would not contaminate the grain with sand or grit. The children worked with practiced motions, despite their youth, having performed this task countless times before. Their baskets, woven from reeds gathered along the lake shore, were light and flexible, perfect for the repetitive tossing motion that allowed air to circulate through the grain and any remaining chaff to float away on the breeze. This was work that required patience more than strength, and the children moved at their own pace, sometimes racing each other, but more often working steadily, understanding that their contribution helped ensure the family's food supply for the months ahead. The grain itself, usually wheat or barley, had been harvested weeks before and threshed by having animals walk over it, a method that separated the edible kernels from the inedible husks. Elderly women sat in courtyard gateways, shelling fava beans from last season's pods, while exchanging quiet morning greetings with neighbors passing by. These gate areas served as natural gathering places, offering shade during hot afternoons and views of community activity throughout the day. The women worked with experienced fingers, easily distinguishing good beans from those that had been damaged by insects or moisture. Their conversation was gentle, unhurried, touching on family matters, health concerns, upcoming celebrations or observances. They watched the village wake around them, noticing which children were helping their parents, which tradesmen were beginning their day's work, which travelers might be passing through. Their position at the gateway gave them a view of both the interior courtyard and the street beyond, making them informal guardians who knew the patterns of daily life and could identify when something was amiss. The fava beans they shelled would be soaked and cooked, providing protein and fiber that supplemented the grain-based diet that formed the foundation of most meals. The first fishermen already stood at the shore, carefully mending nets made from plant fibers, knowing that today's catch would feed their families and village neighbors alike. These nets were works of art as much as tools of trade, each knot tied with careful precision, each section examined for wear or damage that might allow a valuable fish to escape. The fibers, often made from flax or other plants processed to create strong, water-resistant cordage, had been twisted into threads by the fishermen themselves or their family members, often during winter months when fishing was limited by weather. The mending was contemplative work, requiring concentration, but allowing the mind to drift, to plan the day's fishing spots, to consider the needs of the community they served. A good catch meant not only food for their own tables, but surplus to trade for grain, oil, wine, or services they could not produce themselves. The boats that would carry these nets waited nearby, small wooden vessels that had been painted with pitch to seal them against the water, each bearing the marks and repairs of years on the lake. Farmers walked to their fields carrying wooden plows with metal tips, accompanied by patient oxen whose breath formed small clouds in the cool morning air. These journeys began while the sky still held traces of night, the paths familiar to both man and beast through countless repetitions across changing seasons. The plows themselves were simple but effective tools, wooden beams with carefully forged iron tips that could break through compacted soil and create the furrows needed for planting. Farmers carried them across their shoulders, the weight balanced and manageable, their calloused hands comfortable on the worn wood. The oxen walked with steady purpose, these animals that had been raised from calves specifically for this partnership, trained through patient repetition to respond to voice commands and gentle prods. Their breath in the chilly morning air created visible proof of life, small puffs that dissipated quickly but marked their progress toward the day's work. These were not the hurried steps of those who resented their labor, but the steady pace of those who understood both the necessity and the dignity of working the land that sustained them. The distinctive rhythm of planting could be heard as workers created small holes with digging sticks, dropping 3 to 5 grain seeds before covering them with practiced movements. This method, ancient and tested, ensured that each seed had adequate space to grow while providing enough plants that some would survive the threats of birds, insects, or weather. The digging sticks, usually made from hardwood with carefully shaped tips, allowed precise control over planting depth. Important because seeds planted too shallow might dry out or be eaten, while seeds planted too deep might not reach the surface at all. Workers moved across prepared furrows in steady progression, their bodies bending and straightening with the repetition of motion that had been performed in this landscape for thousands of years. The sound was subtle, a soft puncturing of earth followed by the gentle rustle of seeds dropping from practiced fingers, then the scuffing sound of soil being pushed back into place. Each movement was both independent and part of the larger pattern, individual actions combining to create the agricultural foundation of the community's survival. Terraces carved into hillsides centuries earlier caught the early sunlight, their retaining walls built from the same basalt stone that naturally blanketed much of Galilee's landscape. These stone walls were marvels of practical engineering, built without mortar through careful selection and placement of rocks that locked together under their own weight, creating barriers that resisted both erosion and gravity. The terraces transformed steep slopes into usable agricultural land, each level providing relatively flat ground where crops could be planted and tended. The basalt stones themselves, dark and dense, had been formed by ancient volcanic activity that had shaped this region long before human feet walked these hills. Farmers incorporated them into their landscape design, using the abundant material to create boundaries, structures, and these essential terraces. In morning light, the dark stones absorbed warmth that would later radiate back to the soil and plants, creating microclimates that extended the growing season and protected tender crops from unexpected cold. The terraces followed the natural contours of the land, never fighting the geography but working with it, honoring the shape of the earth while making it more productive. Families worked plots passed down through generations, where the soil had been enriched by countless seasons of natural mulch from decayed plants and careful composting. These were not vast commercial farms, but intimate parcels that a family could manage with their own labor, perhaps supplemented by neighbors during crucial times like planting or harvest. The knowledge of each plot was detailed and personal, passed from parent to child, along with the land itself. They understood which areas held moisture longer after rain, which sections warmed earliest in spring, which spots seemed to favor certain crops over others. This intimacy with the specific piece of earth they worked created relationships that went beyond simple utility, the land becoming part of families' identity and story. The soil improvement happened gradually, through the return of plant waste, the careful cultivation of legumes that fixed nitrogen from the air, the addition of animal manure, and the patient waiting for natural processes to transform these additions into rich, dark earth that would feed next season's crops. This was sustainability born not from modern philosophy, but from simple necessity, the recognition that caring for the land meant it would continue to care for them. The gentle sound of pruning knives on olive branches created a steady cadence as growers shaped their trees to catch maximum sunlight while maintaining their graceful, spreading forms. Olive trees could live for centuries, their twisted trunks becoming landmarks in the landscape, their cycles of growth and rest marking the passage of time with more reliability than any calendar. Pruning was essential work, removing dead wood, thinning crowded branches, opening the center of the tree to light and air circulation. The knives used were specialized tools, curved blades that could make clean cuts without tearing bark, preventing disease while encouraging healthy new growth. Growers moved through their groves with intimate knowledge of each tree, understanding its history of production, its tendency toward certain shapes, its needs for the coming season. The cut branches were not wasted, serving as fuel for cooking fires or material for simple furniture and tools. The sound of steel against wood was rhythmic and peaceful, the physical manifestation of careful tending that would result in abundant harvests when autumn arrived. Pruning happened in late winter, before spring growth began, timing that allowed trees to direct their energy toward the most productive branches. Young boys learned to scatter mustard seeds along field borders, understanding these bright yellow plants would not only season food, but also help fix nutrients in the soil. This was agricultural wisdom passed down through observation as much as instruction, the recognition that certain plants served multiple purposes beyond their primary value as crops. Mustard plants grew quickly, their yellow flowers attracting beneficial insects, while their deep taproots broke up compacted soil and drew nutrients from subsoil layers that other plants couldn't reach. When the plants died, they released these nutrients back to the surface soil and added organic matter that improved texture and water retention. Young boys took pride in this responsibility, feeling the importance of contributing to the family's food production even before their arms were strong enough for heavier work. They scattered the tiny seeds with careful hands, learning to distribute them evenly rather than dumping them in clusters that would crowd each other. The bright yellow flowers that would appear weeks later brought both practical benefit and simple beauty to the field edges, their cheerful color visible from a distance and serving as markers of the field's boundaries. Women sang quiet work songs in Aramaic while weeding between grain rows, their melodies carrying across fields where purple lupines grew wild among the cultivated crops. These were not formal performances, but practical accompaniment to repetitive work, songs whose rhythm helped maintain steady pace, while the lyrics varied from traditional ballads to improvised verses about daily life. Singing while working made the labor seem lighter and passed the time more pleasantly, transforming solitary effort into shared experience when voices harmonized across the distance between workers. The Aramaic language itself connected them to their ancestors and to the community around them, a shared tongue that marked their identity and heritage. The lupines growing wild represented nature's own additions to the cultivated landscape, beautiful flowers that also fixed nitrogen in the soil and provided bee forage. Some might be harvested for their own use, the seeds ground into flour after careful preparation to remove bitter alkaloids. Others would be left to reseed naturally, their purple spikes providing contrast to the golden grain that would follow as summer progressed. These interplantings of cultivated and wild species created agricultural systems that were more resilient than monocultures, various plants supporting each other through the complex interactions of a natural community. The careful practice of leaving field corners unharvested for the poor created natural refuges where doves and small animals could feed undisturbed throughout the growing season. This tradition served multiple purposes, fulfilling religious obligations to care for those less fortunate, while also creating wildlife habitat that supported the broader ecosystem. The edges of fields where harvesting stopped were places of transition, where cultivated land met wild landscape, where the neat rows of grain gradually gave way to native plants that grew in profusion, given protection from human disturbance. Here, among the uncut stalks, small creatures found shelter and food, doves nested in relative safety, and beneficial insects overwintered to emerge in spring, ready to pollinate crops and control pest populations. Farmers understood these connections, recognizing that their own prosperity was linked to the health of the land beyond their fields. That saving room for others meant saving room for nature's processes that ultimately served their own interests. The religious command became agricultural wisdom, the social obligation created ecological benefit, and the whole system worked together in ways that modern agriculture, with its rigid separations and clear boundaries, often forgot or ignored in pursuit of maximum immediate yield. Workers paused at midday to share flatbread, olives, and cheese under the shade of fig trees, whose broad leaves created cool, speckled sanctuaries from the Mediterranean sun. This midday break was essential, not optional, the recognition that human bodies could not maintain continuous physical effort through the hottest hours without rest. The fig trees had been planted strategically, their placement chosen to provide shade during the times when it was most needed, their productive capacity providing both food and shelter. Under their spreading branches, the ground remained noticeably cooler than the surrounding exposed soil, the leaves overhead filtering sunlight and creating moving patterns of light and shadow that seemed to dance with the slightest breeze. The meal itself was simple but nourishing. The flatbread made from grain ground that morning, the olives from trees that grew throughout the region, the cheese from goat or sheep milk transformed through fermentation. Workers ate leisurely, allowing their bodies to recover, sharing conversation, and sometimes brief naps. This was not lost time, but invested time, the restoration of energy and spirit necessary for productive afternoon work when temperatures moderated slightly and the sun moved lower in the western sky. As afternoon shadows lengthened, families gathered fallen branches for cooking fires while allowing their flocks to graze on harvested stubble, completing the ancient cycle of cultivation and renewal. The fallen branches had accumulated since the previous autumn, wind providing the service of pruning by breaking dead wood from trees, gravity completing the process by bringing it to ground level. Collecting this wood was work that could be shared between generations, children learning to identify the best burning wood while contributing to household needs. The stubble left after harvest was not wasted, but served as forage for sheep and goats, the animals grazing cleaning the fields while converting inedible plant material into valuable milk, meat, and manure. This integration of crop and animal agriculture created closed loops of nutrient cycling, each element supporting the others in ways that maximized efficiency while minimizing waste. The flocks that moved through the fields in late afternoon were guided by shepherds who knew the boundaries of each family's plot, respected fences and walls, understood the complex system of rights and responsibilities that governed village life. These patterns had remained largely unchanged for centuries, the rhythms of planting and harvest, growth and rest, work and celebration following the reliable patterns of seasons and weather that shaped life in ancient Galilee. Fishermen launched their boats from pebbled beaches, their wooden vessels painted with pitch to prevent water damage, each bearing family symbols passed down through generations. These beaches were made of smooth stones worn by constant lapping of lake water, providing solid footing for the heavy work of moving boats into the shallows where they could be floated and rowed into deeper water. The boats themselves were modest in size, designed to be managed by small crews, their shallow drafts allowing access to coastal areas where fish fed among the reeds and rocks. The pitch used to seal the wood was a sticky resin collected from pine trees, applied hot and allowed to cool and harden, creating a waterproof barrier that protected the wooden planks from constant immersion. Family symbols, carved or painted on the boats, served to identify ownership and carried the weight of tradition, each mark representing continuity across decades or centuries. Some were simple geometric designs, others more elaborate combinations of initials or images significant to the family. These symbols meant something to the whole community, everyone knowing which boats belonged to which families, each vessel carrying not just fishermen but the reputation and history of those who owned it. The distinctive sound of weighted nets hitting water echoed across the lake as crews worked in practice synchrony, their movements learned from childhood observation and participation. These nets were constructed with weights along the edges, usually stones that had been shaped and drilled, allowing the nets to sink quickly and surround schools of fish before they could scatter. The sound was unique, a combination of splash and thump as the weighted edges hit the water almost simultaneously, followed by the quieter sound of the net settling into the depths. Crew members had learned to coordinate through years of working together, their timing perfected until they could perform the movements almost without thought. Young boys learning the trade would practice with older fishermen, gradually moving from shore tasks to boat work, from handling ropes to helping cast nets, until they earned the trust of the crew and the right to take their place among the working fishermen. This apprenticeship happened naturally, children growing into roles they had watched their fathers and uncles perform since infancy, the rhythms of fishing becoming as familiar as breathing. Early morning mist often lingered over the freshwater lake, creating ethereal conditions where the cries of fishing crews seemed to emerge from another world beyond the visible shore. This mist formed when cool night air met the relatively warm water of the lake, creating dense fog that hugged the surface and obscured both water and distant land. Within this fog, sounds behaved strangely, traveling farther and seeming to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The fishermen used this to their advantage, their calls to each other carrying across distances that would normally require them to be much closer. They developed distinctive cries for different purposes, signals that could be recognized even when the caller was invisible in the fog. The effect was dreamlike, disembodied voices manifesting from white nothingness, creating connections across invisible water. To those on shore, listening in dawn's quiet, this chorus of voices represented the daily miracle of sustenance emerging from hidden depths, food that would appear in market stalls and cooking pots despite the mysterious process that produced it. The famous tilapia, known locally as street Peter's fish, fed along the rocky shallows, their movements detectable by experienced fishermen who read the water's surface like an open book. These fish were bottom feeders, adults often creating nests in the lake bed where they would guard their eggs and young. Fishermen learned to spot the subtle signs of their presence, the slight disturbances on the water's surface that indicated fish movement below, the particular way that water flowed around submerged rocks where these fish liked to gather. Street Peter's fish had been named after St. Peter, traditionally believed to be a fisherman on this very lake, the connection giving the fish special status in local folklore and tradition. They were prized for their flavor and for the ease with which they could be caught, though ease was relative and required experience to know when and where to find them. The fishermen who knew these patterns shared the knowledge with younger generations, teaching them to observe the angle of sunlight on water, to notice the behavior of birds that also hunted these fish, to understand how seasonal changes affected fish feeding habits and locations. Women and children on shore prepared wicker baskets laid with fresh reeds, ready to receive the morning catch that would be sorted by size and type before going to market. These baskets were woven by hand, often during winter months when fishing was limited, using materials gathered from wetlands around the lake. The fresh reeds laid inside created a bed that protected the fish from bruising and allowed some water to drain away, keeping the catch cool while it waited for processing. Sorting the fish was a skill learned by watching and doing. Understanding which fish were prized by which customers, which would command higher prices, which were best for preservation, which should be sold fresh as soon as possible. Children learn to handle fish with respect for the life given and for the need to keep the catch in prime condition for market. The baskets themselves represented the important role that women and children played in the fishing economy, their contributions essential to transforming raw catch into goods ready for sale and consumption. This was family work, each member contributing according to their abilities, the whole operation depending on this cooperation. The gentle rocking of boats at anchor created a constant, soothing rhythm, while men repaired nets using bone needles and plant fibers, twisted into strong, water-resistant cordage. When fishing was finished for the day, boats would be pulled to shore or anchored in protected coves, their hulls rising and falling with the natural movement of the lake. This rocking was gentle, the waves small under normal conditions, creating a motion that could be felt even on land when sitting close enough to the water. Inside the boats, men sat with nets spread across their laps, carefully examining each section for tears or weak spots, mending damage with the same skill that created the original nets. Bone needles were prized tools, often made from the ribs of larger animals, smooth and strong enough to pass repeatedly through tough fibers. The cordage was made from plants like flax, processed to remove woody material, then twisted or braided to create threads of various thicknesses. Net repair was contemplative work, allowing fishermen to study their equipment carefully, to plan for future fishing, to discuss techniques and observations with their fellows. The water lapping against hulls provided a constant background sound, the lake's own voice accompanying their work. Along the shoreline, great blue herons stood motionless for hours before striking at unwary fish, their patient hunting methods admired and sometimes imitated by observant children. These large wading birds were masters of stillness, their grey-blue plumage allowing them to blend with both water and sky, their concentration absolute as they waited for the perfect moment. Children watching from shore could not help but be impressed by this patience, so different from their own restless energy, yet they learned that this was a form of strength, the ability to wait with purpose. Sometimes they would try to imitate the herons, standing as still as possible while family members worked nearby, testing their own capacity for patience against the bird's seemingly endless ability to remain motionless. The heron's sudden strikes demonstrated perfect timing, the long neck extending like a spear, the sharp beak piercing water and emerging with a wriggling fish. This was hunting reduced to its most essential elements: no wasted motion, no unnecessary effort, just perfect readiness and instantaneous action. Fishermen respected these birds, seeing them as skilled competitors who understood the lake's patterns as well as any human. The practice of preserving fish with local salt created aromatic smoke that drifted from simple processing huts where families worked together, preparing their catch for distant markets. Salt was obtained from natural deposits in the region or from evaporation ponds along the shore, its preservative qualities allowing fish to be stored for weeks or months instead of being consumed immediately. Processing involved cleaning the fish, packing them in salt, then sometimes smoking them over slow fires fed with wood that created particular flavors. The smoke carried the distinctive scent of this work, a smell that was at once earthy and oceanic despite the freshwater source. Processing huts were simple structures, designed to allow smoke to circulate while protecting the workers and the fish from rain and sun. Families worked together in these spaces, the division of labor based on skill and experience, some cleaning fish with swift, practiced cuts, others managing the fires and monitoring the smoking process. This was work that extended the value of their catch, allowing them to trade with inland communities that lacked access to fresh fish, creating economic relationships that connected the lakeshore to the broader region. Evenings brought the peaceful scene of boats pulled high on shore, their hulls upturned to dry, while crews shared stories under starlit skies, undimmed by any artificial lights. After the day's labor, when nets had been repaired and the catch processed or sold, fishermen gathered on the beach, their boats positioned to allow air circulation that would dry any remaining moisture and prevent rot. Sitting on the smooth stones or simple wooden benches, they talked about the day's fishing, exchanging observations about where fish had been found, what techniques had worked well, what changes in weather might mean for tomorrow's efforts. These conversations were important for passing on knowledge, but they were also simple companionship, the pleasure of shared experience and mutual understanding. Above them, the night sky stretched vast and brilliant, stars visible in numbers impossible to count, their positions and movements familiar guides for navigation and timekeeping. Without artificial light to dim them, the stars seemed close enough to touch, their ancient light a connection to generations of fishermen who had gathered under these same constellations, telling similar stories about the lake and the life it provided. The lake's constant presence provided not only food, but also a moderating influence on local climate, keeping winters milder and summers cooler than the surrounding hills. Bodies of water have this effect, their thermal mass absorbing heat during warm periods and releasing it during cold, creating more stable temperatures in the immediate vicinity. For the communities clustered along its shores, this meant extended growing seasons for gardens and orchards, reduced risk of frost damaging crops, more comfortable living conditions throughout the year. The lake also created microclimates based on wind patterns, the water cooling air that passed over it and carrying moisture inland, supporting vegetation that might otherwise struggle in the more arid landscape. This environmental benefit was simply part of life, taken for granted by those who had always lived in this place, but crucial to their ability to survive and thrive. The lake's water evaporated under the Mediterranean sun, forming clouds that might drift inland and provide rain, connecting the local water cycle to broader patterns of weather and climate. Fishermen and farmers alike understood these connections, reading the lake's surface for signs of changing weather, knowing that the water that gave them fish also gave them favorable conditions for growing the grain and fruit that completed their diet. Extended families gathered in courtyard homes where grandparents shared wisdom with grandchildren, while parents prepared meals in clay vessels set atop carefully arranged cooking stones. These courtyard homes were central to village life, their design reflecting the importance of family connection and shared space. The courtyard itself served as an outdoor room, used for cooking and eating, for work and play, for social gatherings and quiet contemplation. Surrounding this central space were the rooms where family members slept and stored their belongings, simple spaces that opened onto the communal area. Grandparents held honored positions in these households, their lifetime of experience valued as practical guidance for younger generations facing familiar challenges. Children learned through observation and gentle instruction, watching their elders perform tasks that had been performed in this same way for centuries. The cooking stones, positioned for stability and optimal heat distribution, supported clay pots that held stews and grains slowly transforming into nourishing meals. These fires burned throughout the day, tended carefully to provide continuous access to cooking heat, the smoke rising and drifting across the courtyard, carrying the complex aromas of herbs and spices that flavored every dish. The daily rhythm of grinding grain at stone mills created background music to village life, the repetitive circular motion becoming almost meditative for those who performed this essential task. Grain grinding was women's work, usually performed early in the morning before other activities demanded attention. The mills consisted of two stones, a lower stationary base and an upper stone with a central hole for feeding grain and a wooden handle for turning. The motion was circular and steady, requiring both strength and endurance, the upper stone riding on the lower as kernels of wheat or barley were crushed between them. This work was often done in pairs, women sitting across from each other, taking turns with the grinding, or one holding the mill steady while the other turned. The sound was distinctive, a soft grinding that marked the beginning of each day, creating flour whose sweet, nutty fragrance filled the courtyard. The repetitive nature of the work allowed for conversation, for storytelling, for singing, the mind free to wander while the body performed familiar motions. This was necessary labor, but it was also social time, the shared effort binding women together in the common cause of providing for their families. Homes expanded naturally around shared courtyards where multiple generations lived, their interconnected lives creating natural support systems for childcare and shared responsibilities. This architectural arrangement reflected the social structure of village life, the understanding that families functioned best when they could support each other through daily cooperation. Young parents raising children had the benefit of grandparents close at hand, experienced caregivers who could offer both practical help and accumulated wisdom. The courtyard design meant that no one lived in isolation, every aspect of life visible to the extended family, creating both accountability and assistance. Tasks were shared according to ability and availability, older children watching younger ones, adults pooling resources for major purchases or communal projects. This arrangement also meant that space was used efficiently, no family needing to duplicate facilities that could serve multiple households. The shared courtyard became a place where community happened naturally, where relationships were maintained through constant low-level interaction, where children learned social skills by observing and participating in the complex dance of family life. This extended family structure provided security in a world where individual households would have struggled to meet all their needs alone. The evening lighting of oil lamps marked a gentle transition from daytime activities, their small flames creating pools of warm light that encouraged quieter conversations and storytelling. As natural light faded from the sky, these lamps were brought out, small clay bowls filled with olive oil and fitted with twisted flax wicks that drew fuel upward by capillary action. The lighting was a ritual, the careful placement of wicks, the striking of flint against steel to create sparks that ignited the oil. Each lamp produced a circle of warm light that defined the space of activity, leaving the outer areas in soft darkness that encouraged rest and reflection. Families gathered around these lights, the day's work done, the evening meal finished, time now for the slower rhythms of rest and connection. Storytelling was central to this time, grandparents recounting tales from their own childhoods or from the deeper past, myths and histories that connected the family to their ancestors and to the broader community. Children listened, their imaginations fired by these narratives that taught values while entertaining, that preserved culture while creating bonds between generations. The soft light of oil lamps created an atmosphere distinct from the bright sun of day, time seeming to slow, the focus narrowing to the circle of family and the intimate space shared by those who belong together. Children learned crafts by observation and gentle guidance, with young girls learning to spin wool, while boys practiced basic woodworking under patient paternal supervision. This learning happened naturally within the flow of daily life, not through formal lessons, but through the integration of children into productive activities. Young girls sat near their mothers and grandmothers, first watching the magical transformation of loose wool into consistent thread through the rhythm of the drop spindle or spinning wheel. They began with simple tasks, learning to hold the fiber correctly, to judge the right amount of twist, to maintain steady tension. Mistakes were expected and corrected gently, the goal being gradual improvement rather than immediate perfection. Boys learned similar lessons in the workshop areas, starting with simple shaping of soft woods, learning to use tools safely, developing the hand-eye coordination necessary for precise work. Their fathers and uncles guided them, demonstrating techniques, offering encouragement, allowing them to work alongside and gradually take on more complex tasks. This education was practical, preparing children for adult responsibilities, but it was also deeply social, teaching them their place within the family and community, while developing skills that would serve them throughout their lives. The crafts themselves, whether spinning or woodworking, were activities that required concentration but allowed for conversation, for passing on knowledge both technical and cultural. The walls of homes, built from local field stones, held together with clay mortar, absorbed the day's heat slowly and released it through cool nights, creating naturally comfortable living spaces. This passive solar design was not consciously planned as such, but discovered through centuries of building with available materials and observing results. The thick stone walls, often several feet thick at the base, provided thermal mass that moderated indoor temperatures, staying cool during hot summer days and warm during winter nights. The clay mortar that held the stones together was made from local soil mixed with water and sometimes straw, its plasticity allowing it to fill gaps and cracks, its properties as a binder improving as it dried and hardened. Plaster, made from similar materials, covered both interior and exterior surfaces, creating smooth walls that could be decorated with simple murals or left plain. The construction process was community work, neighbors helping neighbors to lift heavy stones into place, to mix mortar, to build the wooden roof framework. These homes were built to last, their solid construction resisting weather and time, often standing for generations with only minor maintenance. The natural materials connected the inhabitants to their landscape in a very direct way, their homes literally made from the stones of their fields. Family meals featured fresh flatbread dipped in olive oil, accompanied by lentils seasoned with wild herbs gathered from nearby hillsides where they grew abundantly. The flatbread was made from wheat ground fresh each day, mixed with water and perhaps a bit of salt, then formed into rounds and baked on hot stones or in communal ovens. Its simplicity was its virtue, a perfect vehicle for other flavors while providing satisfying substance. Olive oil, pressed from fruit harvested in autumn, served both as flavoring and as a way to add necessary calories to the diet, its richness complementing the simpler flavors of grain and legumes. Lentils, cultivated in small plots or gathered from wild plants, provided protein and could be cooked quickly compared to other legumes, making them practical for daily meals. The wild herbs, collected during walks through the hills, added variety and nutrition, their flavors ranging from the sharp bite of oregano to the subtle sweetness of wild fennel. Meals were served simply, often eaten with the hands, the bread used to scoop up lentils and vegetables, family members sitting together on low cushions or directly on clean mats spread on the courtyard floor. This was food that connected them to their landscape, each element representing local resources, transformed through simple preparation into nourishment that sustained body and spirit. Grandmothers taught younger women the art of fermenting goat milk into cheese using techniques developed over centuries, each family maintaining their own special methods and flavors. This knowledge was precious, the transformation of perishable milk into preserved cheese, extending the usable life of their animals' production and creating valuable trade goods. The process began with collecting fresh milk, still warm from the animal, then adding a starter culture, perhaps a bit of cheese from the previous batch that contained the necessary bacteria. The milk would be allowed to sour naturally, curds separating from whey in a process that seemed magical despite its scientific basis. Then came the careful work of cutting the curds, heating them gently, draining them in woven baskets that left the distinctive pattern on the cheese surface. Each family had their own variations, perhaps adding wild herbs that grew nearby, or aging the cheese in particular locations that imparted unique flavors from the local molds and yeasts. Grandmothers watched younger women perform these tasks, offering guidance and correction, ensuring that the knowledge would be passed down correctly to the next generation. The cheese itself, once formed and salted, could be stored for months, its flavors developing complexity over time, becoming a staple food that provided protein and fat during seasons when fresh milk was less available. The weekly rhythm included special preparations for the Sabbath, when families gathered to bless bread and wine while remembering ancestral traditions that connected them to past generations. The Sabbath was a day set apart, a time when normal work ceased and attention turned to spiritual matters, family connection, and community gathering. Preparations began the day before, with extra baking, cleaning, cooking, to ensure that Sabbath itself could be peaceful and undisturbed. The blessing of bread and wine was central, these two elements representing the fundamental gifts of sustenance from the earth and from God. The head of the household would offer prayers in Hebrew, ancient words that had been spoken in similar gatherings for thousands of years, connecting this family to all those who had come before. Wine, made from grapes harvested and fermented in community presses, was consumed in small amounts, its ceremonial use marking the special nature of the day. Children participated in these observances, learning the prayers, understanding the rhythms of the calendar, feeling their place within a tradition that stretched far beyond their own limited experience. The Sabbath provided a necessary pause in the constant demands of subsistence living, a weekly reminder that humans were more than workers. That life included celebration and reflection and gratitude for the blessings they had received. Peaceful evenings often found family members gathered around courtyard fires where grandparents told ancient stories while younger family members worked on small crafts or simply listened contentedly. The fire, built from dried wood and maintained through the evening, provided warmth as temperatures dropped after sunset. its flickering flames creating moving shadows that seemed to dance with the rhythm of the storyteller's voice. Grandparents held the honored role of preservers of tradition, their memories containing not only family history, but the myths and legends that explained the world and taught moral lessons. They spoke of ancestors who had overcome hardship, of miracles that had sustained the community during difficult times, of heroes whose examples provided guidance for current challenges. Younger family members listened while their hands stayed busy, perhaps continuing work on weaving projects, carving small figures, mending clothing. The repetitive motions, allowing their minds to fully absorb the stories being shared. These evenings wove the fabric of family identity, each story adding another thread to the complex tapestry of who they were and where they came from. The fire itself seemed to connect them to countless such gatherings around similar flames, back through time to the earliest humans who had huddled around fires for warmth and safety, telling stories to make sense of their world and pass wisdom to their children. Potters shaped local clay on simple wheels powered by foot, their hands guided by muscle memory passed through generations to create vessels both beautiful and functional for daily use. The clay itself came from riverbanks and deposits where fine particles had accumulated over time, cleansed of impurities, and mixed to the right consistency with practiced judgment. The potter's wheel was simple technology, a rotating platform turned by foot power, but in skilled hands it allowed the creation of walls of even thickness and symmetrical forms. Potters worked with their materials rather than fighting them, understanding how wet clay responded to pressure, how it could be coaxed upward into graceful curves or pressed outward into wide bowls. Their hands knew the work independently of conscious thought, fingertips reading the clay's texture and moisture content, making automatic adjustments to speed and pressure. The vessels they created served every aspect of daily life, from tiny oil lamps to massive storage jars that held grain or wine, from cooking pots that could withstand direct flame to delicate serving dishes that graced special occasions. Each piece bore the subtle marks of its creation, the potter's individual style evident in the curve of a rim or the angle of a handle, yet all served their purposes with reliable efficiency. The distinctive sound of looms being prepared welcomed weavers each morning, the rhythmic clacking of warp and weft creating textiles that incorporated patterns specific to individual villages. Weaving was complex work, requiring careful preparation before the actual creation of cloth could begin. The warp threads had to be measured and arranged in precise order, their tension adjusted perfectly to allow the weft to pass between them without puckering or bunching. The looms themselves were simple machines, frames that held the warp threads while allowing alternate threads to be lifted and lowered, creating the shed through which the weft would be passed. The sound of their operation was distinctive, a regular clacking as heddles moved up and down, followed by the thump of the beater pressing each new row of weft into place. Weavers memorized complex patterns, passing shuttles back and forth in sequences that created intricate designs in the finished cloth. These patterns often identified the village where the cloth was made, each community developing signature motifs that distinguished their work from that of neighboring areas. The textiles themselves served many purposes, from clothing to bedding to trade goods, the finest pieces sometimes used as currency or stored as valuable assets. Basket makers gathered reeds from lakeside marshes on specific days, when the moon's phase ensured optimal flexibility, then stored them in cool, dark places for winter crafting. This attention to timing was based on centuries of observation, the understanding that plants harvested at certain phases of the lunar cycle were more pliable and less likely to crack during the weaving process. The reeds themselves grew in abundance around the Sea of Galilee, tall grasses that thrived in the wet soil along the shoreline. Harvesters would cut them with sharp knives, selecting only the straightest and strongest stems, then bundle them for transport back to the village. Once gathered, the reeds needed to be dried slowly to prevent splitting, then stored where they would remain flexible until needed. Basket making was winter work, when agricultural demands were low and the harvested reeds were ready for use. Weavers created vessels in many shapes and sizes, from tiny baskets used for measuring grain to large storage containers capable of holding a family's entire harvest, from fishing creels to bird cages to winnowing baskets used to separate grain from chaff. The patterns of weaving created both beauty and strength, the interlocking reeds forming structures that were light yet strong, flexible yet durable, each piece unique but following traditional forms. Carpenters transformed local cedars and sycamores into furniture that would last generations, using joinery techniques requiring no metal fasteners and creating pieces of enduring beauty. The wood itself was precious, harvested from managed forests where trees were selectively cut to maintain healthy growth for the future. Carpenters understood their material intimately, knowing how cedar resisted insects and decay, how sycamore carved easily yet held detail well, how different woods responded to changes in humidity and temperature. Their tools were simple, chisels and saws and planes with iron blades, but their skill made these basic implements sufficient for creating works of remarkable sophistication. Joinery techniques were the heart of their craft, cutting precise, interlocking shapes that held together through geometry and friction alone, joints that grew stronger over time as wood expanded and contracted. These methods required patience and accuracy, each piece carefully fitted to its partner, test assemblies performed before final glue made the connection permanent. The furniture they created served daily needs, beds and tables and storage chests, but was also designed to be beautiful, with graceful proportions and subtle decorative elements that spoke of the maker's artistic vision. These pieces became family heirlooms, passed from generation to generation, their surfaces worn smooth by decades of use, their joints still strong after centuries. Women dyed wool using natural materials, yellow from onion skins, blue from woad plants, and rich reds from crushed insects, gathered from specific host plants. This work transformed the natural creamy white of cleaned wool into a palette of colors that allowed for beautiful textiles and distinctive patterns. The dyeing process was chemistry practiced as art, requiring knowledge of which plants produced which colors, how to extract the dyes, what mordants would help the color bond to the fibers, how temperature and timing affected the final result. Onion skins, saved carefully from cooking, produced warm golden yellows when boiled and strained, the liquid creating dye baths that could range from pale butter yellow to deep amber, depending on concentration and processing. Woad plants, cultivated specifically for their blue pigment, required fermentation to release their color, a process that seemed magical as yellow liquid transformed into blue dye through invisible biological processes. The red dyes came from insects that lived on particular cacti or other plants. These tiny creatures dried and crushed to produce intense pigments that could create colors from soft pink to deep crimson. Women who mastered these techniques were valued members of the community, their knowledge carefully preserved and passed down through families, each generation perhaps discovering new variations or combinations that expanded the available palette. The careful work of stonemasons created synagogues from local basalt, their dark walls absorbing and radiating solar heat while maintaining cool interiors even during hot summer days. Basalt was the abundant building stone of Galilee, dark volcanic rock that could be split and shaped with iron tools, creating blocks that fit together with precision. Masons selected each stone for its role in the larger structure, some serving as massive cornerstones, others as regular building blocks, still others as decorative elements around doors and windows. The work required understanding of both engineering and aesthetics, ensuring walls were strong enough to support substantial roofs while creating spaces that felt uplifting and sacred. The dark color of basalt meant that buildings absorbed significant amounts of solar energy during the day. The heat stored in the stone's thermal mass and released slowly after sunset, moderating temperature swings and creating comfortable conditions without any mechanical systems. Interiors remain noticeably cooler than outside air during summer, the thick walls and strategic placement of windows creating natural ventilation that moved air through the space. Synagogues built with this method became community centers, their solid construction testament to the importance of the faith they housed, their design serving both practical and spiritual needs through the integration of local materials and timeless principles. Leather workers softened goat hides using natural oils and plant extracts, creating durable sandals and containers that honored the animals through nothing-wasted workmanship practices. The process of transforming rawhide into usable leather was complex, requiring several stages of treatment that could take weeks to complete. First came cleaning, removing all traces of flesh and fat, then soaking in solutions that loosened hair for removal. Brain tanning, using the animal's own brains mixed with water, provided natural oils that lubricated the fibers, making them soft and pliable. Smoking the finished leather over particular woods added preserving compounds and created the characteristic color and aroma. From this prepared material, craftsmen created sandals that protected feet while allowing air circulation, essential in the hot climate. They also made containers, everything from water bottles to storage bags, each piece designed for durability and functionality. The philosophy of using every part of the animal was practical, respecting the life given by ensuring nothing was wasted, but it was also spiritual, acknowledging the sacred nature of life and the responsibility that came with taking it for human needs. Artisans often gathered in workshops where multiple crafts were practiced simultaneously, creating communities of makers who shared techniques and encouraged each other's developing skills. These workshops might be organized around a particularly skilled master, with apprentices and journeymen working in the same space. Or they might be cooperative arrangements where several independent craftsmen shared facilities and tools. The atmosphere was one of both concentration and collaboration, each maker focused on their own work but available for consultation and help when needed. This arrangement allowed for specialization, someone becoming expert at forging tools while another mastered their use, someone understanding the chemistry of dyes while someone else knew the mechanics of weaving. Young people learned by observing not just their own master, but all the craftsmen in the workshop, absorbing knowledge across disciplines that would serve them well in their future work. The workshop became a place of innovation, techniques refined through discussion and demonstration, new ideas tested and perfected through collective effort. These spaces also served social functions, places where news was exchanged, problems were solved, community bonds were strengthened through shared labor and mutual support. The annual maintenance of fishing boats represented a community ritual where makers applied fresh pitch while singing traditional work songs that helped maintain steady application rhythms. Each year, before the major fishing season began, boats would be pulled from the water and carefully inspected, any damaged planks replaced, joints checked and repaired, and new pitch applied to the hull to ensure waterproof integrity. This pitch was a resin collected from pine trees, heated until liquid, then painted onto wood where it would cool and harden into a protective coating. The work required cooperation, some heating the pitch, others applying it, still others moving boats into position and holding them steady during the process. The songs sung during this work served multiple purposes, marking time so that all workers maintain the same pace, lightening the labor through shared joy, preserving traditional melodies that connected them to previous generations who had performed the same tasks. These rituals transformed necessary maintenance into community celebration, the preparation of tools and equipment becoming as important as their actual use. Everyone understood that a well-maintained boat meant successful fishing, that cooperation in preparation meant abundance for all, that the rhythms of work and song bound them together in common purpose and shared identity. Spring arrived as almond trees burst into delicate white and pink blossoms, their early flowers providing the first promise of the agricultural abundance that would follow in coming months. These trees were among the first to awaken from winter dormancy, their blossoms appearing before leaves, created a stunning display against still bare branches. The flowers themselves were small but numerous, creating clouds of soft color that could be seen from a distance, their pale hues contrasting with the dark bark and the clear blue sky of early spring. Almond trees held special significance in this landscape, their nuts providing valuable nutrition and their blossoms marking the beginning of a new growing season. Farmers watched these trees carefully, knowing that their flowering signaled the appropriate time to begin preparations for planting, that the soil would soon be warm enough to receive seeds. The blossoms attracted early pollinators, bees venturing out from their hives on warm days, carrying pollen from flower to flower and ensuring the development of the nuts that would ripen by summer. This early flowering also meant that almonds could be harvested before other crops required full attention, making them an efficient use of labor and land. Summer evenings brought cool breezes descending from the Galilean hillsides, where wild cyclamen bloomed in protected crevices, their swept-back petals shaped by centuries of wind adaptation. These delicate flowers emerged from underground tubers as winter rains concluded, their blooms appearing before the summer heat became intense. They grew in the most unlikely places, their roots finding purchase in tiny pockets of soil accumulated in rock crevices, their needs minimal beyond what nature provided. The flowers themselves were remarkable, petals that seemed to bend backward as if blown by an invisible breeze, colors ranging from deep magenta to soft pink to pure white. They bloomed in shade, their preferred habitat protecting them from the harsh summer sun, their growing season timed to take advantage of moisture that lingered in protected locations. The breezes that cooled evening villages came from these hills, air moving downward as temperatures dropped, bringing with it the subtle perfumes of wildflowers and the promise of comfortable sleep after hot days. This natural air conditioning was relief without effort, the landscape itself providing comfort through the simple physics of air movement and temperature differential. The autumn olive harvest transformed entire hillsides into scenes of shared labor where families spread woven mats beneath ancient trees, their rhythmic shaking causing ripe fruit to fall like gentle rain. Olive trees were patriarchs of the agricultural landscape, some living for 1,000 years or more, their twisted trunks and gnarled branches testimony to centuries of weather and careful pruning. The harvest itself was a community event, families helping each other in rotation, working through each grove until all the fruit had been collected. The process was physical but careful, workers using long poles to shake branches or climbing ladders to hand-pick fruit from higher branches, the olives dropping onto mats spread to catch them and keep them clean. The rhythmic sound of poles against wood and the patter of falling olives created a harvest symphony that carried across the hillsides, announcing to all the season's abundance. Children helped gather the fallen fruit, their small hands perfect for picking up olives that adults might miss, learning the work that would be theirs in future years. The harvest had to be completed efficiently, the window of perfect ripeness brief, the community's cooperation ensuring that no family's crop was lost to timing or weather. The olives themselves would go to the pressing stones, transformed into oil that would light lamps and flavor food and preserve other foods through the coming year. Winter wildflowers carpeted open meadows with spectacular displays of red anemones, blue lupines, and golden mustard blooms that provided both beauty and nectar for wild bees. These flowers appeared after the first winter rains, their seeds having waited dormant through the hot, dry summer, germinating quickly when moisture arrived. The anemones were particularly striking, their red blooms creating vivid patches of color against the green winter grass, their delicate petals trembling in the slightest breeze. Lupines added blue and purple to the landscape, their tall spikes rising above surrounding vegetation, their palmate leaves distinctive even when the plants were not in flower. Mustard plants grew everywhere, their yellow flowers creating golden fields that seemed to capture and hold the winter sunlight. Together, these wildflowers transformed the landscape, turning ordinary meadows into spectacular gardens that needed no human cultivation. Bees and other pollinators took advantage of this abundance, their activity ensuring that seeds would be set for future years, the cycle continuing with or without human observation. People appreciated these displays both for their beauty and for their practical value, the flowers indicating healthy land, the bees they supported contributing to crop pollination, the seeds providing supplementary food sources. The changing positions of sunrise and sunset were carefully noted by farmers who learned to read these natural calendars that told them when to plant, when to harvest, and when to rest their fields. These observations required no written records, the patterns stored in memory and passed down through generations. The human mind's capacity for pattern recognition applied to celestial movements. Farmers knew that when sunrise aligned with certain landscape features, the season had turned. Particular stars appearing or disappearing in morning or evening skies marked crucial transition points in the agricultural calendar. The sun's daily journey across the sky changed gradually but predictably, its northernmost and southernmost extremes marking solstices that divided the year into growing seasons and dormant periods. These observations were practical, not mystical, based on centuries of trial and error that had revealed which planting dates produced best results, which harvest times avoided damaging weather, which fields needed to lie fallow for a season to restore their fertility. The knowledge was communal, shared among all who worked the land, each generation adding their own observations to the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors. Carob trees provided nutritious pods throughout winter months when other fresh foods were scarce, their sweet flavors offering natural treats to children who knew exactly when to harvest them. These trees were remarkably resilient, evergreen in a landscape where many plants lost leaves during dry seasons, their pods taking a full year to mature and falling naturally when ripe. The pods themselves were dark brown, leathery on the outside, sweet and edible on the inside, containing both pulp and hard seeds that children learned to extract and discard. They were high in sugar and nutrients, providing energy during times when other food sources were limited. The flavor was distinctive, sweet and slightly chocolate-like, making them popular even when other options were available. Children acted as primary harvesters, their small hands perfect for gathering fallen pods, their proximity to ground level allowing them to spot fruit that adults might miss. They learned which trees produced the sweetest pods, which had the fewest insects, the best techniques for opening the tough outer shell to extract the edible interior. Carobs also served as animal feed, the pods collected and stored to supplement livestock diets during winter when fresh forage was scarce. This dual purpose made carob trees valuable community resources, their presence marking reliable sources of both human and animal nutrition. Natural springs, such as Einschäfer, maintained constant temperatures year-round, creating microclimates where unique ferns and mosses flourished despite the region's seasonal climate variations. These springs emerge from underground aquifers, their water having filtered through rock for years before appearing at the surface, clean and cold and constant. The vegetation around them was lush compared to surrounding areas. Ferns that required constant moisture growing in profusion, mosses covering rocks with green carpets, small flowering plants finding niches where roots could reach the abundant water. These oases were important gathering places for people as well as plants, their reliable water making them natural sites for settlements and rest stops for travelers. The microclimate they created extended some distance from the source, cooler air emanating from the water, increased humidity supporting plants that would otherwise struggle in the dry environment. These springs represented the hidden wealth of the landscape, water flowing unseen beneath the surface, emerging to create pockets of abundance and life. People learned to locate them by the vegetation they supported, by the slight depressions in the land that might indicate underground flow, by the animal paths that inevitably led to reliable water sources. The arrival of migratory birds marked seasonal turning points as flocks of storks and cranes passed overhead, their predictable journeys serving as additional indicators of nature's reliable cycles. These birds traveled along ancient flyways, routes used for thousands of years as they moved between breeding grounds in northern lands and wintering areas in Africa. Their appearance in Galilee was timed to coincide with seasonal changes, the storks arriving in spring as temperatures warmed, the cranes passing through in autumn as they headed south. Their formations were spectacular, long lines or V-shapes, their calls carrying down to earthbound observers who looked up and knew that seasons were turning as they should. Children learned to identify these birds, their distinctive silhouettes and flight patterns, their evening roosting behaviors, their feeding habits. The birds themselves seemed to follow invisible highways in the sky, navigating by landmarks, magnetic fields, perhaps even the stars, their journeys so reliable that people set seasonal clocks by their appearance. Some traditions held that these birds carried messages between worlds or between distant places, their arrival bringing news from far away, even if the content remained mysterious. Their passage overhead connected the local landscape to the broader world, a reminder that their small piece of Earth was part of a much larger system of movement and change. Harvest moons illuminated peaceful scenes of families gathering final crops by night, the cooler air making labor more pleasant, while the bright moonlight provided natural illumination. The harvest moon was the full moon closest to the autumnal equinox, its position in the sky and late rising time creating evenings of extended twilight that allowed work to continue past sunset. This was crucial during harvest season when timing was everything and weather was unpredictable, the extra hours of light allowing completion of the gathering before storms or other delays could damage the ripe crops. Families worked together, their movements gentle in the cool night air, the day's heat having dissipated, their breath visible in small clouds that caught the moonlight. Children helped where they could, their smaller bodies less affected by the physical demands, their excitement at being allowed to stay up late, adding energy to the work. The moon itself seemed impossibly bright, casting shadows that were nearly as distinct as those of day, the landscape transformed into a world of silver and black rather than the familiar colors of daylight. This nocturnal harvest created its own beauty, the quiet activity accompanied by night sounds, the rustling of dry crops, the calls of night birds, the distant howling of jackals. The work took on a dreamlike quality, the boundaries between wake and sleep blurring as muscles moved through familiar patterns without conscious direction. The Sea of Galilee's gentle waves created constant, soothing sounds that served as nature's lullaby for communities living along its shores, their rhythms unchanged across countless generations. This eternal sound was part of the background of daily life, always present, sometimes loud enough to notice, often so constant that it faded from conscious awareness, yet contributing to a sense of calm and continuity. The waves themselves were generated by winds moving across the water's surface, their size and frequency changing with weather conditions, but always present in some form. To those who had always lived with this sound, its absence would have been alarming, the quiet indicating something wrong with the natural world. The rhythm of waves was similar to the rhythm of breathing, a pattern that reassured and comforted, that suggested life continuing in its proper order. Children fell asleep to this sound. Adults found their own thoughts settling into its pattern, the worries of the day smoothed by the endless repetition of water against shore. This was perhaps the most constant element in a world of seasonal changes and uncertain fortunes, the lake's voice speaking of permanence amid impermanence, of cycles that would continue long after individual lives had passed. The sound connected them to all who had ever lived on these shores, a thread of continuity that tied past and present together in simple, profound harmony. Women ground fresh wheat each morning, the steady circular motion of stone against stone creating flour whose sweet, nutty fragrance marked the beginning of daily baking routines. This grinding was fundamental to survival, transforming the stored grain that represented months of careful preservation into the fresh flour needed for daily bread. The mills were simple but effective, consisting of 2 stones, a lower stationary base, and an upper stone turned by a wooden handle. Women sat cross-legged before these mills, their bodies leaning into the work, their arms developing strength and endurance through daily repetition. The sound was distinctive, a soft grinding that could be heard throughout the village as each household began their morning, the collective noise creating a peaceful symphony of sustenance. The flour produced was coarse compared to modern standards, containing particles of various sizes that gave the bread texture and character. As the grinding progressed, the sweet smell of fresh grain filled the air, a smell that spoke of abundance and continuity, of the earth's generosity transformed through human effort into daily nourishment. This was work that required patience more than skill, the simple physics of abrasion doing its work as long as the motion continued, the reward being the fine powder that would become the foundation of every meal. The weekly bread-making involved entire families as children fetched water, mothers mixed dough with natural yeast, and fathers prepared outdoor ovens that created perfectly crisp crusts. This was more than cooking, it was a family production that engaged every member according to their abilities. Children carried water from the well, their small buckets contributing to the larger vessels needed for mixing dough. The water itself was important, its mineral content affecting the bread's flavor and texture, its temperature influencing how quickly the yeast would work. Mothers mixed flour with water and starter culture, perhaps a bit of dough saved from the previous batch that contained wild yeasts collected from the air. This mixing was done by hand, the baker learning through touch when the dough had the right consistency, when it had been kneaded enough to develop the gluten that would give the bread structure. Fathers and older sons prepared the ovens, simple domes of clay that would be heated with wood fires, the temperature judged by experience, the timing crucial for proper baking. When the ovens were hot enough, the fire would be raked out, the dough placed inside on flat stones or in clay pots, the opening sealed with a stone door. The bread that emerged had crusts that crackled when tapped, interiors that were soft and airy, the flavor complex from the natural fermentation and wood smoke. Olive harvesting brought communities together in autumn celebrations where massive stone presses squeezed golden oil while participants shared stories and songs passed through generations. The harvest itself was labor-intensive, families working together to collect the abundant fruit, shaking branches and gathering fallen olives from nets spread beneath the trees. Once collected, the olives went to the communal press, a massive stone weighing tons that would be rolled or rotated to crush the fruit and release its oil. This pressing was a social event, people gathering to help and to witness the transformation, sharing food and drink while waiting their turn. The oil that emerged was green gold, fragrant and cloudy, with tiny particles of fruit, liquid gold that represented months of light and cooking and trade. Songs were sung, traditional melodies that helped maintain rhythm during work. Stories were told about previous harvests or family events. Children played underfoot, everyone contributing to an atmosphere of celebration even as they worked. The oil would be stored in clay jars, sealed and stored in cool places, some used for daily cooking, some saved for special occasions, some traded for goods the family could not produce themselves. This celebration of harvest reinforced community bonds, reminding everyone that their individual prosperity depended on cooperation and shared celebration of abundance. The preparation of fish stew required careful layering of flavors: fresh lake fish, wild herbs, onions from garden plots, and oil pressed from local olives, to create nourishing communal meals. This dish was a specialty of lakeside communities, making use of the abundant catch while creating something more complex than simple grilled fish. The process began with cleaning the fish, removing scales and innards, cutting larger fish into portions while leaving smaller ones whole. Then came the building of a fire and the selection of a suitable pot. usually clay, that would distribute heat evenly without burning. Oil went into the pot first, heating until it shimmered. Then onions and other aromatics were added, their flavors developing as they softened and caramelized. Water, or sometimes wine, would be added, along with the firmest vegetables that needed longest cooking. The fish was added last, its delicate flesh requiring only brief cooking to become tender and flavorful. Herbs were chopped and scattered over the top, their fresh green adding both visual appeal and layers of flavor that complemented the rich fish. The stew was served directly from the cooking pot, family members gathering around with bread to soak up the flavorful broth. The meal stretching limited fish to feed many people while creating a dish whose whole was greater than the sum of its parts. Women gathered specific plants for seasoning, hyssop for its minty notes, cumin for warm depth, and wild coriander whose seeds they carefully collected for winter spice blends. Hyssop grew in rocky areas, its small leaves packed with aromatic oils that added distinctive flavor to both food and drink, its biblical mentions giving it cultural significance beyond its practical use. Cumin was cultivated in small plots, its feathery foliage delicate, its seeds harvested when the plants turned brown and dry, then ground into powder that added earthy warmth to countless dishes. Wild coriander, also known as cilantro in its fresh form, provided fresh green flavor during growing season, then surrendering seeds that were collected and stored for use throughout the year. These herbs were gathered fresh just before cooking, their flavors most potent when newly picked. Women learned to identify these plants from their mothers, knowing exactly where they grew, when they were at their best, how much could be harvested without damaging future growth. During winter, these fresh herbs were replaced by dried versions or by seeds that had been carefully saved, maintaining flavor variety even when fresh plants were unavailable. The knowledge of which herbs complemented which foods was part of culinary tradition, certain combinations passed down as family specialties, other pairings discovered through experimentation and shared among neighbors. Date honey provided natural sweetness, made by slowly cooking the abundant fruit until it broke down into rich syrup, used to flavor breads and sweeten special occasion dishes. Date palms grew throughout the region, their fruit plentiful and nutritious, their sugar content making them ideal for creating natural sweeteners. The process of making date honey was patient work. The fruit pitted and crushed, then cooked slowly over low heat for hours, stirring regularly to prevent burning. As the dates cooked, their sugars caramelized, the mixture thickening into a dark, rich syrup with complex flavor far beyond simple sweetness. This honey was used sparingly, a precious addition to special breads or desserts, or stirred into hot water to create sweet drinks. The date palms themselves were multi-purpose trees, their leaves providing material for weaving, their wood useful for construction, their fruit eaten fresh or preserved in various forms. The honey production extended the usefulness of the harvest, creating a product that could be stored indefinitely and used as currency or trade goods. Children loved date honey for its intense sweetness, but it was treated as a special treat rather than an everyday food, its value recognized by all who understood the work required to produce it. The practice of fermenting vegetables preserved summer abundance while creating tangy foods whose complex flavors developed slowly through careful preparation and patient waiting. This preservation method required only salt, water, and time, the natural bacteria present on vegetable surfaces transforming sugars into lactic acid, creating an environment where harmful microorganisms could not survive. Cabbage was a common choice, shredded and packed into clay vessels, its natural liquids drawn out by salt, creating a brine that covered the fermenting material. Other vegetables might be added: carrots for color and sweetness, cauliflower for texture, beets for earthiness and stunning color. The vessels were stored in cool places, their contents checked periodically. The fermentation process allowed to proceed until flavors reached the desired point of tanginess and complexity. This was work that connected summer to winter, the abundant harvest preserved for lean months, ensuring that vegetables remained part of the diet year-round. The fermented foods also provided important probiotics, beneficial bacteria that supported digestive health, though this benefit was understood practically rather than scientifically. Children learned to appreciate these tangy flavors from an early age, the foods becoming comfort items that connected them to their family's particular recipes and methods. Winemaking involved the entire community when grape harvest reduced clusters to juice that would transform through natural fermentation into celebratory drinks shared at all important gatherings. The grape harvest was a time of celebration, entire villages coming together to pick the ripe fruit, some working in the vineyards, cutting clusters from vines, others transporting the grapes to pressing areas where they would be crushed. The crushing was often done by foot, people climbing into large vats and stomping the grapes, their weight breaking the skins and releasing juice that flowed through channels into collection vessels. This juice would begin fermenting naturally, wild yeasts present on the grape skins converting sugars into alcohol, the process monitored but not controlled with modern precision. As fermentation progressed, the wine developed complex flavors, its alcohol content preserving it for months or years, its value increasing with age. The final product was stored in clay vessels, sealed with olive oil, kept in cool cellars or caves where temperature remained constant throughout the year. Wine was consumed regularly, but in moderation, a small amount mixed with water, making it safe to drink when other water sources might be contaminated. Special occasions called for the best vintages, wine that had aged for years, its flavors matured and deepened, shared among family and friends as a sign of celebration and hospitality. Sabbath meals featured specially braided breads, whose twisted shapes represented family unity, while special wines blessed and consumed in small amounts created peaceful ceremonial moments. The braiding of bread for Sabbath was a special skill, practiced weekly, the number of strands and the pattern of weaving carrying symbolic meaning that connected the baker to tradition. Some families braided with 3 strands representing different aspects of spiritual life. Others used more complex patterns, each variation holding significance within that family's practice. The bread itself was often sweeter than daily bread, perhaps enriched with oil or honey, its flavor special and its consumption limited to this holy day. Wine for Sabbath was also special, perhaps the best from the family's store, poured into a special cup used only for this purpose. The blessing of both bread and wine was performed by the head of household, prayers offered in Hebrew, the sharing of these elements, creating a moment when all family members participated in a ritual that connected them to each other and to their ancestors. These meals were eaten leisurely, conversation encouraged, storytelling expected, the pace slow and contemplative rather than rushed and functional. Children participated fully, learning the prayers, understanding the significance, feeling their place in the endless chain of generations who had gathered around similar tables with similar foods, creating memories that would sustain them throughout their lives. The haunting sound of the ram's horn called communities to gathering on holy days, its primal tones echoing across valleys and drawing families toward the local synagogue. This instrument, known as a shofar, was crafted from a ram's horn that had been hollowed and shaped, its natural curve allowing the player to produce sounds of remarkable power and resonance. The calls were not simple blasts, but carefully modulated sounds, long sustained notes, short staccato bursts, wavering cries that seemed to express emotions beyond words. Hearing the shofar from a distance, people would stop their work, recognizing the call to assemble, the reminder of sacred time intruding on ordinary activities. The sound carried far, its low frequencies traveling around obstacles and across long distances, a non-verbal communication that united scattered households into single community. Children would pause in their play, looking up from their tasks, listening to the ancient call that marked their identity and belonging. The shofar was played only on significant occasions, its sound reserved for moments when the entire community needed to gather, when individual concerns gave way to collective worship and reflection. The player would stand in a prominent position, usually at the synagogue entrance or on an elevated place, and send the sacred sounds outward, trusting them to reach all who needed to hear. Friday evenings welcomed the Sabbath with the gentle lighting of oil lamps, whose small flames symbolized divine presence settling peacefully over home and family throughout the day of rest. This lighting was performed by the woman of the household, a role passed from mother to daughter that marked the transition from ordinary time to sacred time. As the sun set, she would prepare the lamps, checking that they were filled with oil, that the wicks were properly trimmed, that they would burn cleanly through the evening. The lighting itself was accompanied by blessings, ancient words in Hebrew that sanctified the act and the time that followed. The flames, once lit, were not to be disturbed, their gentle light creating an atmosphere of peace and reverence that would characterize the entire Sabbath. This small ritual transformed ordinary homes into sacred spaces, the presence of the lit lamps reminding all who saw them that this day was different, set apart for rest and reflection. The light itself was soft and warm, not the harsh brightness of day, but a gentle glow that encouraged quiet conversation and storytelling, that made the home feel safe and blessed. Children watched this ritual with solemn respect, understanding that when the lamps were lit, the ordinary rules of work and play gave way to something more peaceful and profound. Torah readings created natural pauses in village life as everyone gathered to hear ancient words chanted in melodious Hebrew, whose cadences provided calming rhythm to community gatherings. The Torah scroll, written by hand on parchment made from animal skins, was the most precious possession of the community, stored in a special ark within the synagogue and brought out only for readings. The reader would stand before the community, unrolling sections of the ancient text, chanting the words with specific musical notations that gave them rhythm and beauty beyond their literal meaning. These readings happened on regular schedules, the entire scroll completed over the course of a year, the predictable pattern giving structure to community time. Even those who could not understand the literal words of the ancient Hebrew knew the stories, had heard them many times, could follow along through familiarity. The chanting itself was meditative, its repetitive patterns and melodic phrases creating a sense of peace and timelessness. Children learned to sit quietly through these readings, absorbing the atmosphere, if not the meaning, developing reverence for this central act of their community's spiritual life. The scroll itself was treated with the greatest respect, its condition carefully maintained, its handling restricted to those trained in its proper care. The practice of reciting morning prayers at sunrise connected worshippers to daily creation rhythms, while the setting sun marked evening prayers that celebrated completed work. These prayers were short but significant, words of gratitude for awakening to a new day, for the restoration of life that sleep provided, for the opportunity to begin again with each dawn. Recited while washing hands and face, while preparing for the day's activities, these prayers rooted the individual in a sense of purpose beyond simple survival. The morning prayers acknowledged the gift of consciousness, the blessing of another day of work and love and community. Evening prayers were different, words of thanksgiving for what had been accomplished, for safety through the day's labors, for the coming rest that would restore body and spirit. These prayers also served as transitions, marking the boundaries between sleep and wakefulness, between private repose and public activity. They could be recited alone or in groups, their familiar words creating a shared experience even when performed individually. Children learned these prayers by repetition, the words becoming automatic over time, rooted in memory so deeply that they would be available throughout life. The connection to natural cycles was deliberate, worship timed to the movements of the earth and sun, the rhythms of the body aligned with the rhythms of creation. Ritual immersion pools served both spiritual and practical purposes, their cool waters refreshing bathers, while their construction demonstrated community cooperation in creating sacred spaces. These pools, known as mikvehs, were built following specific requirements regarding size, depth, and the source of water, which had to be natural rather than drawn by human hands. They served the purpose of ritual purification, allowing people to cleanse themselves from states of impurity described in religious law. But they also provided regular bathing that promoted physical cleanliness in ways that were practical and healthful. The construction of a mikveh was a major community project, requiring engineering skill to ensure proper water flow, artistic vision to create a space that felt sacred, and communal labor to complete the substantial excavation and building. Once completed, these pools became centers of community life, places where women gathered regularly, where conversions were performed, where spiritual transitions were marked by physical immersion. The waters themselves were cool, often fed by springs or aquifers, their constant flow ensuring cleanliness and connection to natural sources. The experience of immersion was powerful, submerging completely in water, feeling the symbolic act of washing away that which needed to be released, emerging renewed and ready to resume regular life with restored spiritual status. Pilgrimage festivals transformed quiet villages as visitors passed through, bringing news from distant communities while participating in local hospitality that represented core religious values. During these times, the regular rhythms of village life gave way to preparations for hosting travelers, extra bread baked, rooms prepared, space made in homes for guests who had journeyed far to celebrate in Jerusalem. These visitors brought more than their need for food and shelter. They brought stories from other places, news of relatives who had moved away, accounts of different practices and perspectives that broadened local understanding. The hospitality extended to them was not just kind but commanded, religious law requiring that those who had resources share them with those on pilgrimage. This created an atmosphere of generosity and openness, communities defining themselves in part by their willingness to serve others. Children learned through observation that their own homes might welcome strangers, that sharing what they had was both duty and blessing, that their village existed as part of a larger network of faith and practice. The festivals themselves created anticipation throughout the year, their approach marked on calendars, their requirements studied and prepared for. Their celebration, creating memories that would sustain faith and community identity. Even those who could not travel to Jerusalem participated through the hosting of pilgrims, their own observance enriched by the presence of those who were making the journey. The yearly cycle of readings ensured that every portion of sacred texts was considered within predictable patterns that provided spiritual grounding amid daily life's inevitable changes. This lectionary system meant that no part of the Torah was neglected, that the entire story was reviewed and reconsidered regularly, that wisdom contained in even the most obscure passages would be brought to light. The predictability was comforting, worshippers knowing what would be read when, able to prepare their minds and hearts, ready to hear familiar words with fresh perspective as their own life circumstances changed. Children coming of age could anticipate the moment when they would be called to read the passage for their birthday or special anniversary, could prepare for this honor with study and practice. The system also created connections across space and time, Jews in different villages reading the same text on the same days, feeling their participation in a unified practice that transcended local differences. The readings were chanted, not simply spoken, their musical settings enhancing meaning and aiding memory, the cadences becoming familiar through repetition until they seemed part of the natural rhythm of life. This integration of sacred text into the calendar year ensured that religion was not separate from daily existence but woven through it. The stories and laws and poetry becoming the background against which ordinary life was lived and understood. Blessings recited before and after eating transformed simple meals into conscious gratitude practices that honored the connection between Earth's provision and human consumption. These blessings were short, usually only a few lines, but their effect was profound, creating a pause between hunger and satisfaction when the source of food could be acknowledged and appreciated. Before eating, blessings thanked God for bringing forth bread from the earth, for creating the fruit of the vine, for providing the specific foods about to be consumed. These words reminded eaters that they were not merely consuming fuel, but receiving gifts, that their survival depended on processes beyond their control or creation. After eating, longer blessings expressed gratitude for the land, for nourishment, for the continuing ability to eat and live and worship. These practices slowed down meals, preventing the hurried consumption that turns eating into mere biological function, restoring awareness and appreciation for each element on the table. Children learned these blessings early, the repetition making them automatic, the habits of gratitude becoming ingrained. Even the poorest meal was thus elevated, its simple elements acknowledged as sufficient and appreciated as gifts. This constant practice of blessing created a mindset of thankfulness that extended beyond food to all aspects of life, teaching that gratitude was not dependent on abundance, but was appropriate regardless of circumstances. The practice of leaving fields unharvested at edges provided physical expressions of commanded generosity, while creating natural spaces where wildlife could feed undisturbed. This was the law of Payar, the commandment to leave the corners of fields for the poor to glean, but its effects were broader than simple charity. These unharvested areas became corridors for wildlife, places where birds and small mammals could find food and shelter, where beneficial insects could overwinter, where the boundaries between human agriculture and natural ecosystem remained permeable. The practice taught that landowners were not absolute owners but stewards, that their rights to the harvest were balanced by obligations to the broader community, including those less fortunate and the natural world itself. Poor members of the community could gather in these areas, collecting whatever had fallen or been missed by the main harvest, securing food that supplemented their limited resources without the shame of direct charity. The edges also served as buffer zones, reducing conflicts over boundaries, providing space where useful plants could grow wild, where children could play without damaging crops, where the neat geometry of cultivation met the organic forms of nature. This integration of commanded generosity with practical ecology created systems where human need and natural health supported each other, where religious law guided behavior toward both compassionate and sustainable outcomes. Evening study sessions often found groups gathered around oil lamps where older members taught younger ones to read while sharing insights accumulated through years of reflection and practice. As daylight faded and work ceased, people would gather in homes or synagogues, the limited light of oil lamps creating intimate circles of learning. The texts studied were often the same ones read earlier in communal worship, now examined in detail, questions asked and answered, interpretations offered and debated. Older members took pleasure in teaching, passing down not just the ability to read the ancient Hebrew, but the wisdom to understand its application to contemporary life. Younger members brought fresh perspective, their questions revealing new aspects of familiar passages, their enthusiasm reminding elders of their own youthful discovery. These sessions were egalitarian in their own way, children learning alongside adults, questions valued more than authority, understanding sought through dialogue rather than lecture. The oil lamps themselves created atmosphere conducive to contemplation, their warm light seeming to slow time and encourage patience, the gentle flickering creating natural pauses for thought. This study was not separate from life, but preparation for it. Sacred texts examined for guidance in practical matters, their ancient wisdom applied to current challenges, creating a bridge between eternal values and daily decisions. The ability to read and study was itself a form of wealth, creating connections between individuals and communities, ensuring that traditions would continue not through rote repetition, but through understanding and appreciation of their deeper meanings. Water wells served as natural community centers, where women gathered daily to draw from communal sources while exchanging news, recipes, and gentle gossip that maintained social connections. These wells were the lifeblood of the village, providing water for drinking, cooking, washing, and irrigation, their importance making them natural gathering places. Women came throughout the day, each with her own routine, but the well created opportunities for interaction that might not occur otherwise. While waiting for their turn at the rope and bucket, they talked about the small matters that sustained community life: who was expecting a child, which crops were doing well, recipes for preserving summer abundance, remedies for common ailments. This exchange of information was essential for maintaining social cohesion, the well serving as the village's communication network just as it served as its water source. The work itself was rhythmic and physical, pulling water from depth requiring effort that became easier through shared labor. Women helping each other, holding ropes steady, guarding filled vessels while others continued drawing. Children accompanied their mothers, learning both the practical skill of water gathering and the equally important skill of community participation. The wells themselves were often decorated, stones carved with patterns, inscriptions recording who had contributed to their construction, making them places of beauty as well as utility. Their constant presence and reliable flow gave the community security, the knowledge that water would always be available, that this basic need would be met through shared resources and collective maintenance. The placement of threshing floors on elevated ground created natural gathering spots where families brought harvests for processing while children played safely nearby. These floors were carefully constructed, circular areas of hard-packed earth or stone, where grain could be spread and threshed by having animals walk over it, or by beating it with flails. Their elevated position served multiple purposes: catching breezes that would help separate grain from chaff during winnowing, providing good drainage that kept the floors dry, creating landmark locations visible throughout the surrounding area. During harvest season, these floors became centers of activity, families taking turns using the space, working together to ensure that everyone's grain was properly processed before weather could damage it. The rhythm of threshing was communal, workers moving in coordinated patterns, the sound of flails hitting grain, creating a steady beat that carried across the fields. Children were drawn to these places, the open spaces perfect for games, the activity of adults providing both entertainment and education, as they watched and learned the methods they would use in their own futures. The floors also served as meeting places during other times, their open nature and central location, making them natural spots for community announcements or celebrations. Their practical function as processing centers transformed them into social centers, work and community life integrated seamlessly. Village elders settled disputes beneath spreading fig trees whose ample shade provided comfortable settings for listening carefully while offering wisdom based on decades of local experience. These informal courts relied on respect for age and accumulated knowledge rather than formal legal training, the elders having witnessed countless conflicts and resolutions over their long lives. They understood village dynamics, knew family histories, could see patterns that younger people missed. When disputes arose over boundaries, borrowing and lending, inheritances, or other common sources of conflict, those involved would bring their case to these respected figures, sitting with them in the shade, presenting their perspectives, listening to questions and advice. The setting itself encouraged peaceful resolution, the beauty of the ancient tree, the gentle movement of leaves in the breeze, the temporary escape from the demands of work, all contributing to a mindset open to compromise and understanding. Elders did not impose solutions but guided parties toward their own agreements, asking questions that revealed common ground, reminding them of relationships that transcended the immediate disagreement, suggesting resolutions that honored both parties' legitimate interests. Their authority came from community consensus rather than official position, their influence based on demonstrated wisdom and fair dealing over many years. Children observing these proceedings learned conflict resolution skills, saw that disagreements could be settled without violence or permanent rupture, understood the value of community harmony. Cooperative building projects brought neighbors together to help construct new homes or repair old ones, with payment provided through reciprocal labor rather than coins. This system of mutual aid meant that major projects could be accomplished without requiring any family to accumulate capital, the investment being time and skill rather than money. When a young couple needed a home, neighbors would gather, some bringing stone, others timber, others the knowledge of how to build, each contributing what they could. The work proceeded in phases, foundations laid by strong men, walls built by experienced builders, roofs thatched by those who understood the layering of reeds for waterproofing. Food would be shared, the family for whom the house was being built, providing meals for workers, extended picnics that combined labor with social connection. The reciprocal nature meant that those who helped would receive help when their own time of need arrived, creating networks of obligation and gratitude that bound the community together. This system also ensured that building knowledge was shared, not hoarded by a few specialists, everyone understanding the basics of construction, many developing real skill through participation in multiple projects. Children helped where they could, learning through participation, carrying water to thirsty workers, gathering small stones for chinking walls, bringing tools to those who needed them. Their small contributions valued as part of community effort. The practice of sharing tools ensured that expensive implements like plows and oil presses served entire communities rather than individual owners, creating natural rotation schedules. These items represented significant investments of resources: the metal for plow tips, the massive stones for olive presses, the timber for their frames, but their use was seasonal, making individual ownership inefficient. Instead, communities would own these tools collectively, maintaining them through shared contributions of labor and materials, then scheduling their use according to need and fairness. The plow might pass from family to family during planting season, each using it for their own fields before passing it to the next household. The olive press would serve the entire community during harvest, families bringing their olives in scheduled order, the work of pressing shared, the equipment cared for by all. This sharing created natural reasons for cooperation, neighbors helping neighbors with work that required these tools, strengthening bonds through shared labor. Children learned that ownership was not absolute, that property could be held in common for the benefit of all, that sharing resources created stronger community than individual accumulation. The tools themselves became community symbols, reminders that survival and prosperity depended on working together, that the ancient principle of sharing ensured that everyone had access to what they needed for success. Midwife services represented crucial community knowledge where experienced women assisted birthing mothers while teaching younger women techniques that saved lives and reduced complications. In a time before professional medical care, these women were essential community resources, their skills determining the outcomes of pregnancies, their knowledge of herbs and positioning and emergency procedures making the difference between life and death. They were on call at all hours, ready to respond when labor began, bringing with them clean cloths, herbal preparations, experience honed through attendance at hundreds of births. Their role extended beyond the actual delivery, providing prenatal advice about diet and activity, postnatal support for both mother and infant, guidance for the transition to motherhood. Younger women would assist them, learning through observation and gradual participation, first holding cloths and water, later helping position mothers, eventually taking on more responsibility as their skills and confidence grew. This apprenticeship system ensured that the knowledge would never be lost, that each generation would have access to experienced practitioners, that techniques successful for centuries would be preserved and refined. Midwives also served as keepers of women's wisdom more broadly, understanding the cycles of fertility, the treatment of common ailments, the emotional challenges particular to their gender and time. Their work was compensated, but often through barter or reciprocal services rather than money, their contributions to community survival recognized as essential and invaluable. Food preservation knowledge was shared communally, with experienced practitioners teaching others how to transform summer abundance into winter stores through tested, reliable methods. This education happened naturally through daily life, women gathering to process harvests together, each contributing her own expertise to collective effort. Some were skilled at drying fruits and vegetables, arranging them in the sun or in low ovens, turning them regularly to ensure even preservation. Others understood fermentation, the subtle signs that indicated proper bacteria were at work, the timing of various stages of pickling and winemaking. Some specialized in preserving with salt, knowing exactly how much was needed to cure fish or meat without making them inedible. These specialists were not possessive of their knowledge, understanding that community food security depended on everyone having these skills. They taught through demonstration, explaining why certain steps were necessary, what could be varied and what must remain constant, how to judge readiness through sight and smell and taste. Children absorbed this information as they helped, their tasks simple at first, becoming more complex as they demonstrated competence and understanding. This communal sharing meant that no family would starve because they lacked knowledge, that if one person's stores failed, others would share. That the village as a whole was more secure than any individual household could be alone. The evening gathering at village gates saw men conclude their workday while discussing crops, weather patterns, and community matters requiring collective attention or decision-making. This was the village council, informal but influential, where important issues were raised and debated before formal decisions were made. Men would gather as the sun set, their day's labor finished, standing or sitting near the main entrance to the village, a natural meeting place that allowed them to monitor who was arriving or departing while conducting village business. They discussed which fields needed repair after winter rains, whether the communal well required deepening, how to handle a dispute that had escalated beyond what elders could resolve, what news travelers had brought that might affect the community. These discussions were democratic in nature, every man able to voice his opinion, decisions reached through consensus rather than voting, the wisdom of the group emerging through careful consideration of all perspectives. Young men listened and learned, understanding that citizenship meant participation, that they would eventually take their place in these councils, that their own opinions would be valued as they gained experience. The setting itself was symbolic, the gate representing both the boundary of the community and its connection to the wider world, the place where internal decision-making met external reality. Wedding and harvest celebrations created opportunities for entire villages to honor participating families while sharing abundant foods and participating in traditional circle dances. These celebrations broke the routine of daily life, transforming ordinary time into festival time when work ceased and community came together in joy. Weddings were particularly significant, the joining of two families, creating relationships that would influence village dynamics for generations. Preparations extended over days, cooking extra food, decorating the home or community space, practicing music and dances. The celebration itself lasted into the night, feasting and toasting, singing songs that told stories of love and commitment, dancing in circles that included everyone regardless of age or ability. Harvest celebrations were more broadly based, the entire community giving thanks for successful gathering, sharing food from each family's stores, acknowledging that the harvest had required everyone's contribution and therefore belonged to everyone. Music for these events was simple, drums and flutes and voices, creating rhythms that encouraged movement, the steps learned from childhood, the joy of participation more important than technical perfection. Children watched and learned, eventually joining the circles, their initial awkwardness giving way to confident movement as they absorbed both the physical patterns and the emotional release that dancing provided. These celebrations reinforced social bonds, created shared memories, reminded everyone that their community was more than a collection of households. It was a living entity, sustained by mutual participation in each other's joys and sorrows. The peaceful practice of hospitality welcomed strangers and pilgrims with water for washing, shared meals, and safe sleeping arrangements that strengthened community bonds while honoring visitors. This practice was commanded by religious law, but practiced as natural expression of community values, the understanding that every person was created in the divine image and therefore worthy of respect and care. When strangers arrived, they were offered water first, the ancient gesture of welcome that allowed them to wash away the dust of travel and refresh themselves. Then came food, simple but plentiful, shared with genuine generosity, regardless of the stranger's appearance or apparent wealth. Sleeping arrangements were provided, a corner of the courtyard or a spot near the fire, protection offered for the night, with no expectation of payment beyond stories from the road or news from distant places. This hospitality created connections between villages, travelers carrying word of which communities were welcoming, which maintained these traditions of generosity, which were best avoided by those journeying through unfamiliar territory. Children learned to accept strangers without fear, to offer what they could, to understand that their own family might someday be traveling and need similar kindness from others. The practice also served practical purposes, creating networks of information that connected isolated villages, allowing news to travel along the routes of pilgrim and merchant, ensuring that communities were not completely cut off from the broader world. In providing for others, villagers maintained their own humanity, practicing values they hoped to receive when their own time of need arrived. Sunset painted Galilee's rolling hills in shades of amber and rose, while farmers guided tired oxen toward home, along shadowed paths they'd walked since morning light first appeared. The colors of evening transformed the familiar landscape, distant hills becoming silhouettes against the brilliant western sky, the contours of the land emphasized by long shadows that stretched across the valleys. Farmers and their teams moved slowly, the day's work having drained both human and animal energy, the pace now unhurried and contemplative. The oxen, so patient throughout the long hours of ploughing or hauling, now showed their own readiness for rest, their steps steady, but their heads lowered with fatigue. The paths they followed were worn deep by generations of similar journeys, the earth packed hard by countless hooves and feet, the turns and slopes known so well they could be navigated without thought or guidance. These twilight journeys were times for reflection, the mind free to wander over the day's accomplishments and failings, to plan for tomorrow's work, to simply notice the beauty of the world as light faded and colors softened. Children who had helped in the fields walked with their families, small hands occasionally reaching up to touch the rough hide of the oxen, feeling the warmth of living muscles beneath the coarse hair, understanding the partnership between human and animal that made their survival possible. The air itself seemed to settle as sun disappeared, the winds that had blown throughout the day growing calm, sounds carrying farther in the cooling air. The evening preparation of oil lamps created intimate domestic scenes where families gathered around small flames that provided perfect circles of light while leaving outer rooms in gentle darkness. This was the evening ritual that marked the end of outdoor work and the beginning of indoor time, the transition from the public world of community labor to the private world of family connection. The lamps were simple clay bowls with spouts for the wick, filled with olive oil that had been pressed in autumn and carefully saved for lighting the long nights of winter. Wicks were made of twisted flax, their preparation another small task that required experienced hands to roll the fibers into tapering cords that would draw oil upward and burn steadily. The first lighting required a spark from flint and steel. The small flame transferred to the wick, which would then burn continuously for hours. Families would cluster around these lights, the warm glow illuminating faces and creating an atmosphere of closeness and calm. The darkness beyond the circle of light was not frightening but peaceful, a soft blanket that wrapped around the home and separated it from the outside world. This was time for conversation, for storytelling, for quiet work like mending or spinning, for children to ask questions and receive patient answers. The limited light-focused attention, the absence of visual distractions, encouraging listening and contemplation, the small flame seeming to hold at bay the darkness and any worries it might contain. Young children learned to identify constellations while lying on rooftops where they'd helped dry grain earlier, now observing stars freed from competing with earthly lights or modern distractions. These rooftop observatories provided the perfect venue for astronomy, the flat surfaces allowing comfortable reclining, the elevated position giving unobstructed views of the entire sky, the darkness away from cooking fires, creating ideal viewing conditions. Children learned first the brightest stars, those that seemed to maintain constant positions while others moved through the night, then the patterns they formed, the constellations that had guided travelers and marked seasons for millennia. Parents would point out the seasonal positions, how certain stars appeared only at specific times of year, how their rising and setting could predict weather or mark important dates in the agricultural calendar. These lessons were practical, teaching navigation by night, teaching timekeeping without mechanical devices, teaching the larger cycles within which human lives were lived. But they were also magical, introducing children to the vastness of the universe, the beauty of points of light scattered across darkness, the comfort of predictable patterns that seemed eternal compared to human concerns. The grain that had dried on these same rooftops during the day had been collected and stored, but the habit of gathering in this elevated space continued, the night sky offering ongoing education and endless wonder. Night sounds included the gentle lowing of contented cattle, the soft rustle of settling birds in tree branches, and the constant soothing background of waves against distant shores. These auditory elements created a soundscape entirely different from daylight hours, the absence of human activity allowing natural sounds to predominate. Cattle in their enclosures, having eaten their fill of the day's grazing, settled into comfortable positions, their occasional communications with each other deep and peaceful, expressing contentment rather than distress. Birds settling into roosts created small rustlings as they jostled for position among the branches, their evening songs giving way to sleep sounds, occasional soft chirps as they found comfortable spots. The waves, whether from the Sea of Galilee or from far away, provided a constant bass note to the night's symphony, their rhythm unchanging, their sound the most reliable element of the acoustic environment. Other sounds joined this chorus: the buzzing of insects active at night, the distant call of an owl hunting, the soft padding of small animals moving through the village seeking food or mates, the almost imperceptible sound of air moving through trees. Together, these sounds told listeners that the world continued even as they slept, that natural processes maintained their ancient patterns, that the night was not empty, but full of life continuing its own important activities. The practice of reviewing the day's work created peaceful moments of reflection where farmers considered tomorrow's tasks while acknowledging completed labor with satisfaction and gratitude. This mental exercise happened naturally in evening's quiet, the mind replaying the day's events, noting what had gone well, what might be improved, planning for the next day's priorities. Farmers thought about which fields needed attention, which animals might need special care, what tools required repair, what weather patterns might develop. This review was not anxious worrying, but practical assessment, the mind of someone deeply engaged with their work and their environment, someone whose survival depended on accurate observation and good planning. Alongside these practical considerations came appreciation for the work accomplished, recognition of the strength expended and skills employed, gratitude for the ability to work and for the results achieved. This was not boastful pride, but quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that they had done their best with the resources and opportunities available. that their effort contributed to the family's survival and the community's well-being. Children participated in these reflections, asked about their contributions, taught to think ahead and to appreciate their own growing competence. These conversations created closure for the day, mentally separating the completed work from the rest that should follow, allowing peaceful sleep without unsettled concerns circling endlessly in the mind. Lovers and friends walked along moonlit paths between villages, their quiet conversations accompanied by fireflies whose gentle blinking added natural luminescence to summer evening strolls. These walks provided private time in a world where most activities were communal, opportunities for intimate conversation away from the crowded courtyard or the busy fields. The moon provided enough light to navigate the familiar paths, its reflection on leaves and stones, creating a world of silver and shadow that seemed magical compared to the clarity of day. Fireflies emerged on warm evenings, their bioluminescent flashes creating small bursts of living light, unpredictable and enchanting, their patterns forming and dissolving in the darkness. Couples walked slowly, their pace unhurried, the journey more important than any destination, their voices low to preserve the evening's peace. They talked of dreams and plans, of feelings difficult to express in daylight's busyness, of hopes for families and futures. Friends walked together too, sharing confidences, seeking advice, maintaining bonds that sustained them through life's challenges. These walks connected villages, the paths themselves becoming familiar in darkness as well as light, the landmarks taking on different character in moonlight, the journey between home and loved ones becoming a pleasure rather than a chore. The night air carried the scent of flowers that bloomed only after dark, making the experience aromatic as well as visual and auditory, engaging all senses in appreciation of the world transformed by night. The late-night sound of olive presses created steady rhythms as final processing continued, their slow turning representing urgent work tempered by patient understanding of natural requirements. Olive pressing was not rushed. The process required time for the oil to emerge from the crushed fruit, the weight of the pressing stones gradually squeezing out every possible drop. At night, when other work was finished, the turning of these presses continued, their motion powered by men walking in circles, pushing the heavy stone across the crushed olives spread on mats. The sound was distinctive, a regular creaking or groaning as the stone moved, the methodical pace impossible to hurry, the work requiring stamina rather than speed. Those who turned the presses worked in shifts, walking their circle in the dim light of oil lamps, their minds free to wander, while their bodies performed necessary motions. This was the final stage of harvest processing, the culmination of months of growth and careful tending, the precious oil emerging drop by drop, golden in the lamplight. The rhythm of the press seemed to match the rhythm of night itself, slow and steady, unhurried by day's demands, patient with natural processes that could not be forced. This work connected the workers to countless others who had performed the same task in autumn evenings past. The continuity of tradition expressed through simple, physical repetition. Families who'd worked separately throughout daylight hours reunited in sleeping quarters where multiple generations rested together, their quiet breathing creating domestic harmony's most intimate expression. These sleeping arrangements reflected both practical necessity and cultural values, families too poor to afford separate rooms for each person, communities that valued closeness and connection over individual privacy. The quarters themselves were simple, mats or mattresses spread on the floor, blankets or cloaks for warmth, the room warm from the day's retained heat in the stone walls. Parents slept with young children between them, protecting them both physically and spiritually, grandparents nearby to assist in nighttime needs or simply to share space. The sounds of sleep were soft, breathing rhythms that varied with age and depth of rest, occasional murmurs or small movements that went unnoticed by sleeping companions. This closeness meant that dreams might be shared, that comfort was immediately available after bad dreams, that warmth and security were constant throughout the night. It also meant that individuals learned to sleep amid small disturbances, to be aware of others even in rest, to feel themselves part of a unit rather than isolated beings. Children grew up knowing the breathing patterns of their family members, able to identify who was awake or restless, developing sensitivity to the subtle cues that indicated health or distress. The darkness itself was not complete. Small oil lamps sometimes left burning through the night, their minimal light enough to navigate safely while maintaining an atmosphere of rest and peace. The cool night air carried natural perfumes from night-blooming plants whose fragrances intensified after sundown, creating invisible gardens that blessed those awake to notice their secret beauty. These plants, including night-blooming jasmine and certain species of evening primrose, timed their scent production to attract nocturnal pollinators, their oils becoming more volatile in the cooling air, spreading farther and more intensely than during hot daylight hours. The effect was subtle but pervasive. Entire areas of the village bathed in fragrances that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Those who walked at night, whether on necessary business or simply enjoying the peace, moved through invisible clouds of perfume, the experience ephemeral and magical. The source plants were often simple and unassuming during the day, their beauty hidden from casual observation, making their nighttime generosity seem even more special. A secret shared with those willing to venture out after dark. The smell of these flowers mixed with other night scents, the earthiness of cooling soil, the faint aroma of wood smoke from fires left burning low, the smell of water from wells or cisterns, creating a complex olfactory landscape that was completely different from daytime. This sensory richness added another dimension to night, proving that darkness was not empty, but full of experiences requiring different forms of perception, that the world transformed after sunset into something mysterious and wonderful. As deepest night settled over Galilee, the ancient landscape rested under stars whose positions helped villagers track seasons, predict weather, and maintain connections to ancestral rhythms guiding peaceful daily life. The night sky was a calendar, a clock, a compass, its patterns read by those who knew its language, the predictable movements of celestial bodies marking time's passage with perfect regularity. The North Star remained constant, a fixed point around which all other stars seemed to turn, providing direction for any who could find it. Constellations appeared in different positions throughout the night, their rising and setting marking hours as reliably as any mechanical device. Seasonal changes were written in the sky, certain stars appearing on the horizon just before dawn or just after sunset, their emergence announcing planting times or harvest dates that had been observed for generations. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness in summer, its cloud of stars reminding viewers of the universe's vast scale, putting human concerns in perspective through sheer immensity. People who fell asleep watching these stars dreamed of journeys and possibilities, their consciousness expanding beyond daily concerns to encompass the eternal patterns that surrounded them. The stars connected them to ancestors who had observed these same configurations, who had used them for similar purposes, who had passed down the knowledge necessary to read the sky's messages. In deepest night, when all work was finished, all conversations concluded, all thoughts of tomorrow set aside, these stars provided silent companionship, proof that something beautiful and ordered existed beyond human effort, that cycles would continue regardless of individual dreams or fears, that peace could be found simply by looking upward and remembering one's small but significant place in the endless dance of cosmic time.